blizzard, John sat hunched on his haunches near the fiery maw of the wood-burning stove, holding his hands out to the flame. Clenching a nearly smoked cigarette between his teeth, he squinted to keep the ember from crawling too close to his thick gray mustache. His pride and joy. Solid plan. His colleague nodded curtly. Tomorrow's my daughter's birthday. Promised I'd be there. Plus, it's not far. Less than 60 miles. How old is she turning? John asked. 12. John smirked crookedly. When people asked him his age, he'd long since stopped giving straight answers. He usually said something like, I might turn 56 this August, not because of health issues. He was still spry for his years, but because at this stage, you never know if you'll make it that far. After 40, blood pressure acted up, joints ached, and reading glasses became a necessity. Time bore down on him, invisibly but heavily. Having seen enough hard lessons, thankfully, not all firsthand, John understood life's fragility. Sure, it'd be great to live into old age, but fate doesn't ask permission before knocking. It just happens. Take a thermos of coffee with you, the boss advised sternly, and don't speed. Reach out as soon as you get there. I will, Robert promised, pulling on a coarse high-necked sweater and grabbing his coat from the rack. Robert braced himself. Outside, the blizzard raged like a wild beast, hurling snow and wind against the window pane, as though desperate to break in and warm itself by the fire. Leaving the station in weather like this, months of pent-up fury exploding in one February day, was madness, pure insanity. But Robert had no choice. All year he'd worked tirelessly, day after day, often missing family moments. He wasn't just doing it for his daughter, he did it for himself too, ensuring she'd have everything she needed in life. So when his time came, and it would come someday, he could leave this world knowing he'd fulfilled his duty to his family, his child and himself. Yet deep down, Robert knew material things, money, possessions, couldn't replace a father's love. What was the point of wealth if it sacrificed him? The most precious thing, time spent with his loved ones. Godspeed, John said, shaking his hand firmly. Don't rush, the boss reminded him. Tucking the thermos under his jacket, Robert opened the door. Struggling against the howling wind, the storm hit him like 1,000 icy needles. Hunched over, sheltering behind the fluffy hood of his coat, he stepped into the pale, swirling gloom. Snow lashed at his face, stinging his eyes. Each step sank him knee-deep into the untouched abyss, as if the earth itself resisted his journey, pleading for him to reconsider. His trusty old Jeep Cherokee, half buried in snow, looked like a giant kitten, curled up for a nap under a fluffy white blanket. The car door didn't budge easily. The melted snow from earlier had refrozen around the seals, gripping the metal tightly. The handle slipped from his gloved hand and clattered back into place. Cursing under his breath, Robert grabbed it again and yanked harder. The door finally swung open with a sharp tearing sound, as if eager to escape without the rest of the vehicle. Settling into the driver's seat, which groaned with frozen leather, Robert exhaled a cloud of vapor and slammed the door shut, muffling the storm's wail. Out of habit, he jiggled the gear shift to confirm neutral, then tugging off his glove with his teeth, He pulled the key from his pocket, pressed the clutch, and turned the ignition. The engine started reluctantly. The first attempt failed miserably. He quickly released the key, fearing he'd flood the carburetor. A second try yielded similar results. The crankshaft spun sluggishly in the frozen oil, moving about as willingly as a corpse in its coffin. Letting go of the key, Robert patted the steering wheel, the icy plastic bit at his skin. It felt less like touching an inanimate object, and more like stroking a prickly hedgehog. "Come on, baby, don't let me down," he muttered, crossing himself mentally. He turned the key again. This time, the Jeep shuddered violently, coughed like clearing its throat, spat out acrid blue smoke, and slowly began churning pistons through intake manifolds, reluctantly burning fuel. The engine sputtered at first, groaning like a wounded animal, but gradually found its rhythm. Soon it purred contentedly, harmonizing with the raging tempest outside. The temperature gauge needle crept upward. Robert switched on the headlights, their beams slicing through the snowy haze. The windshield wipers, sluggish at first, cleared drifts from the glass, leaving only streaks of frost that quickly melted under the heater's warm blast. Before shifting into gear, he honked the horn, a sharp beep cutting through the storm, to signal goodbye to his boss. For a fleeting moment, through the chaos of the blizzard, he thought he saw a shadow, John waving back, or was it just the wind playing tricks, tugging at the curtain, and creating a human-like silhouette? The Jeep lurched forward, breaking pristine snow with its bumper, like an icebreaker slicing through polar seas. The road disappeared into milky oblivion. Beneath layers of snow, asphalt was barely discernible. The most reliable landmarks weren't lane markings but power poles lining the highway to the right, standing like skeletal gallows. Heavy cables sagged under the weight of clinging snow, swaying in the wind like loops ready to hang intruders. The SUV trudged onward, carving tracks into the untouched expanse, its four wheels clawing through packed snow. But the blizzard resisted, erasing evidence of human presence almost instantly. Tonight belonged to the storm. Mortals had no place in its icy dominion. The Jeep handled well, moving steadily if not quickly. If the weather held or worsened, which he hoped wouldn't happen, it would take Robert 3 hours to reach home. He smiled sadly, and shook his head. No, it was better to adopt John's philosophy. Maybe I'll be home. Nothing catastrophic would prevent him from arriving, but minor delays were possible. 3 hours might stretch to 4, or even 5, though that seemed unlikely. Still, nothing was guaranteed except sunrise in the east. Using his teeth to pull a cigarette from the pack, Robert flicked the lighter and unzipped his jacket. It was getting warm inside. He twisted the radio dial, but static hissed angrily across all frequencies. Replacing the old cassette player had been on his to-do list for years. Cassettes themselves were relics of childhood, but he doubted even worked anymore. He treated the Jeep purely as transportation, maintaining only essential components. Everything else could wait. In tonight's bleak madness, the Jeep was his sole ally. Illuminated by the glowing red eye of the lighter, Robert took a drag. 10 kilometers lay behind him, swallowed by the storm like salt dissolving in soup. 90 remained, a daunting 90,000 meters, through the widow's domain. The monotony lulled him. Power poles emerged from the murk, passed by, and were replaced by identical ones. Drifts repeated endlessly. It felt like driving in circles, passing the same scenery over and over. No sleeping. He snapped himself awake, feeling his head droop toward his chest. Extinguishing the cigarette in the ashtray, he reached for the thermos. Twisting the cap cup, he carefully poured steaming coffee. Its aroma carried hints of oak and nut. John's special recipe, spiked with a splash of brandy. The cup warmed his palms. The first sip, burned his throat, sending pulsating heat radiating through his veins, reaching even his toes. After the second sip, drowsiness retreated. For now, it hadn't surrendered. It merely hid, waiting to return later. Finishing the coffee, Robert turned to fasten the cap back onto the thermos, and that's when a shadow fell across the windshield. Tall, thin, yet somehow alive. It wasn't a pole. The figure flinched in the headlights, raising arms to shield its eyes. Robert yanked the wheel instinctively. The Jeep tilted sharply, tires tearing through snow, before crashing into the guardrail. Metal groaned, plastic screeched, and the sour smell of coolant filled the air. The rearview mirror trembled, and the engine sputtered one last defiant growl before falling silent. Thick steam billowed from under the hood. "Damn it," Robert hissed, zipping up his coat and pulling the hood over his head. He jumped out of the Jeep. The shadow vanished as suddenly as it appeared. No trace of anyone on either side of the road. And why would there be, 50 miles from the nearest town, in such a storm? Who'd be foolish enough to wander outside? People stayed indoors during nights like these. There were no footprints. None at all. Just pristine, untouched snow. The blizzard couldn't have erased them so quickly. What had he seen? A hallucination? Fatigue-induced delusion? Even worse, he'd wrecked his car because of some idiotic mirage. The Jeep had smashed into the guardrail, as if trying to bite through the steel bar. Part of the barrier pierced the plastic grille, rupturing both it and the radiator, and God knows what else under the hood. Blue coolant pooled beneath the vehicle, melting the snow. "Damn it," he repeated. A fierce gust blew his hood off, and the frost licked his face with a rough sandpaper-like tongue. Shivering, Robert hurried back into the warmth of the Jeep. Rubbing his frozen hands together, he tried starting the engine again. The starter whined uselessly. The heart of iron remained cold and indifferent. Once more. Still nothing. Yanking the lever, Robert climbed out once more, and popped the hood. Snowflakes landing on the hot engine hissed like frying eggs, melting instantly into droplets. Without coolant, the engine wouldn't stay warm for long in -30 degrees. Stretching his neck, phone flashlight in hand, Robert tried assessing the damage, but the massive intake manifold blocked his view. All he could tell was that the steel bar protruded somewhere near the timing belt pulleys. The biting cold gnawed at his fingertips, and slamming the hood shut, he returned to the Jeep. Things were bad, very bad. The patient was dead, or close to it. Reviving the car himself was impossible, and help was unlikely to arrive anytime soon. Now Robert felt real fear, true paralyzing fear. Stranded halfway between the station and the city, in a brutal blizzard, 30 below zero, with a busted car. A popsicle dad wasn't exactly the birthday gift his daughter dreamed of. Walking 50 miles in either direction was suicidal, even in good weather. It would take 10 hours today, 20 hours in sub-zero temperatures, knee-deep in snow. Only a penguin or polar bear could survive that. Wiping condensation from his phone screen, Robert dialed. The attempt failed. Unsurprising. The network indicator blinked 4 dots, searching for service. Perfect, Robert muttered. Just perfect. The cabin still retained some warmth. But how long would it last in this freeze? Metal and plastic offered little protection against the frost already etching pale runes on the windows. It was 12:30 a.m. If anyone drove this route, it wouldn't be until 6 or 8 in the morning. If the storm calmed down by then, by sunrise the Jeep would be an icebox. One thermos of hot coffee wouldn't keep him alive for hours. Burning tires seemed inevitable. Thankfully he had 2 spares. One winter tire mounted on the rear bracket, and a summer spare in the trunk he'd forgotten to unload. Each tire might provide 10 to 15 minutes of heat.
still insufficient to last till dawn. It looked like all 4 tires would burn eventually. As for what happened afterward, Robert tried not to think about it. The key was staying awake. Sleep meant freezing. Freezing meant death. He flipped the switch to stop the windshield wipers, conserving battery power. Reaching for the headlight controls, he froze mid-motion. That same silhouette reappeared. The one that made him swerve. Tall and naturally elongated, with an oval head and knotted branch-like arms. It seemed to wiggle its fingers, plucking invisible harp strings. The vision vanished as swiftly as it came, dissolving into the milky chaos of the blizzard, leaving only a memory.